Shalom Hadavarniks. Welcome to Hadavar Messianic Ministries and our School of Biblical and Jewish Studies. We're studying Messianic Prophecy, Rabbinic and Messianic Views, and we're in the Supplementary Prophecies section of the course, and we're beginning section number 18. Session number 18. So let's review where we were in session 17. Now, we were looking at Messianic prophecies in the prophets, and we were in the prophet Isaiah, looking at the virgin birth of the Messiah in Isaiah 7:14. Now, as far as an overview goes, it's a first coming prophecy only. The New Covenant usage, it's a literal prophecy with a literal fulfillment. And the background is the prophet's present time in chapter 7, verses 1 through 13. So we took a look at the people and places of Isaiah 7. We looked at, first of all, Judah, the southern kingdom, whose king is Ahaz, and the capital is at Jerusalem. And the nature of the kingdom, Ahaz was the worst king ever for Judah. Then we move north to Israel or Ephraim, and the king is Pekah, son of Remaliah. The capital is Samaria. Moving one more step north, we came to Aram, which is also known as Damascus or Syria. The king is Rezin, and the capital is Damascus. We then switched to a bigger map so we could pull in Assyria. Assyria will be known as the B in chapter 7. The king is Tiglath-Pileser III, and the capital is at Nineveh. And the final country is to the south of Judah, Egypt, which is called the Fly in chapter 7. Well, then we began our exposition of chapter 7, verse 14. We saw that historically Assyria was on the rise, and smaller kingdoms were uniting in order to resist Assyria. Aram and Israel unite to rebel against Assyria. They want Judah to join them, but Judah refuses. And this causes a reaction from Aram and Israel. They want to overtake Judah, conquer Judah, and install a new king, a Davidic dynasty, get rid of the Davidic dynasty and install the king of Tabiel, the dynasty of Tabiel. And so they begin with their initial strategy of splitting their forces. Damascus comes against Eilat, goes all the way to the south and conquers Eilat. And then Samaria comes against Jerusalem. Well, this initial strategy fails, and so they try a second strategy in Isaiah 7:2, which is a combined forces. The forces of Damascus and Samaria both come against Jerusalem. Well, this is an impressive force, and the house of David and Ahaz, the king, are trembling with fear. And the reason they're trembling with fear is because they're not trusting God and the Abrahamic and Davidic covenants that he's made with the Jewish people. In verse 3, the Lord tells Isaiah to go meet Ahaz with his son Yashar Yeshuv at the conduit of the upper pool on the highway to the fuller's field. And we looked at the map. This was the city of David, and the water supply for the city of David is the Gihon Spring. And then from the Gihon Spring to the south, an aqueduct brought the water down to the pools at the southern end of the city of David. And that's where Isaiah and Ahaz met. When they meet, Ahaz is given words of encouragement. He's told that the head of Damascus, Rezin, will only be the head of Damascus, and Ephraim will be destroyed in 65 years. So not to worry, your kingdom, your dynasty is safe, and you will not be overthrown. And this promise, this encouragement, is given to the whole house of David, and we can see that from the plural pronouns. If you all will not believe, you all surely shall not last. Then God changes to the singular pronouns, and the Lord spoke to Ahaz. Now this is for Ahaz personally. Ask a sign for yourself. Make it as deep as Sheol, as wide as heaven. And Ahaz gets super spiritual and says, I will not ask, I will not test the Lord. Now he's misapplying the principles in Deuteronomy. And so since Ahaz doesn't want a sign, God will give a sign. Well, one to the house of David and one to Ahaz. So he begins with the house of David. Speaking the plural, he says, therefore the Lord himself will give you all of you, a sign. This is the house of David. And that sign is verse 14. Behold, the virgin will be with child in the future. This is The grammar is in the future, and bear a son, again in the future, and you should call his name Emmanuel. And so then we began to look at the disputed word virgin, or ha'alma, and its rival is the word Betula. Now we began in the Encyclopedia Judaica. The biblical Betula, we learned, is an ambiguous term that in non-legal context speaks of age rather than a physical state of virginity. In legal context, however, it does denote a virgin in the strictest sense. So Hadavar's response is to point out that the book of Isaiah is not legal literature. Okay, the book of Isaiah is prophetic literature. Therefore, Betula is not the best choice if you want to talk about virgin. And that's why Isaiah chose Alma. And the ambiguous nature of Betula is brought out in Genesis 24:16 as well as other verses. We read there that the girl was very beautiful, a Betula. Well, we know she's young, we know she's beautiful, but we don't know that she's a virgin or not. We need more information. Betula doesn't provide that information, and so that information is supplied, and no man had relations with her. That's the information that tells us that she's a virgin, not the word Betula. So every time we looked at Betula in the Hebrew Bible, it spoke of the age of the girl and not her virginity. We also looked at the theological word book of the Old Testament, and we read, a strong case can be presented that Betula is not a technical term for virgo intacta, in other words, for virginity in the Old Testament. A conclusion that is important bearing on the meaning of Alma in Isaiah 7:14. Then we started looking at Alma, and we began by looking at David Stern's Messianic Jewish New Testament commentary. He approached Alma from the perspective of cognate studies, associated languages, and we read, Cyrus Gordon, a greatly respected Jewish scholar who does not believe in the virgin birth, so this guy is not biased, holds that the cognate languages demonstrate that in Isaiah 7:14, Alma should be translated virgin. The rabbis who translated Isaiah 7:14 from Hebrew to Greek in 200 BC, that's the Septuagint, rendered the Hebrew word Alma with the Greek word Parthenos. And Parthenos means a mature, chaste, young woman or man. And they chose this word 200 years before Yeshua became an issue. Then we looked at the use of Alma in the Hebrew Bible, and we saw no matter what the context, Alma always referred to a virgin, a young virgin girl, including Isaiah 7:14. It spoke of Alma spoke of the state of virginity. And why? Because it's speaking of a prophetic sign, and a prophetic sign needs something that's unusual. Well, a pregnant virgin is a prophetic sign, because a pregnant non-virgin would not be a sign. That happens every day. But a pregnant virgin would be a sign. Well, that brings us to the new material now, and let's take a look at a graph of the range of meaning between Alma and Betula. Sometimes it's easier to picture what we're explaining rather than just use words. So let's try a graph here, a graphic. We'll start with Alma. Alma means virgin, and it allows for virginity only. Alma is a very precise term with a narrow range of meaning. Now, in contrast, however, Betula, young woman, allows for virginity and marriage. You can be a young woman and being married, and you can be a young woman and a virgin. Both apply when you're using Betula. Betula is not as precise a term as Alma, with a wider range of meaning, and that's what the graph is trying to portray there, the wider range of meaning of Betula. In legal literature, it carries the idea of virgin, no problem. In non-legal literature, it can carry the idea of age. It is an ambiguous term that requires additional information to pinpoint its meaning. So then let's take another look at what the Theological Word Book of the Old Testament says about Alma, page 138. What is clear is that one cannot argue that if Isaiah, in his famous oracle to Ahaz, had intended a virgin, he could have used Bethulah as the more precise term than Alma. You can't argue that way, because Alma is the more precise term. And by the way, Isaiah is not legal literature, and so the word is ambiguous in non-legal literature. It's historical. It's a prophetic literature. And then we looked at page 672, and there we read, there's no instance where it can be proved that Alma designates a young woman who is not a virgin. In every case, the young woman is a virgin. And the context of Isaiah 7:14 requires the miraculous. A virgin conception requires the miraculous. But not everybody agrees with my position, and so I wanted to share with you Michael Brown's position from his series, Answering Jewish Objections to Jesus. This is a very good series to own, but I differ a little bit with Michael Brown on this issue, so I wanted you to be aware of it. Brown takes a softer line on this issue in Volume 3, page 20. There we read, this leads to a question that has received almost endless discussion for close to 20 centuries. Does the word Alma mean virgin? That's our issue, correct. My answer, as a committed believer in Yeshua, and he is, may surprise you, and it did. While the word Alma can refer to a virgin, it does not specifically mean virgin. The basic meaning is primarily related to adolescence, not sexual chastity. Brown bases his decision on almost, quote, almost 30 years, unquote, of study covering a list of more than 39 sources, and this is in Volume 3, page 23 of the series. He finishes with this conclusion, quote, from our current vantage point, it is impossible to determine exactly what the prophecy meant to the original hearers when it was delivered, other than that it was a promise of a supernatural sign, granted, a birth of great importance to the house of David, granted, a token of divine intervention and deliverance, yes, and a rebuke to unbelief and apostasy. So while his evaluation of the sign is strong, I find this a rather weak understanding of Alma in a statement that demands the miraculous. You need a strong understanding if you need the miraculous there. You have to have a strong basis for it. However, Brown notes a statement by John Walton in the Journal of the Evangelical Theological Society, Volume 30. Walton states, the word primarily describes an adolescent or young woman of marriageable age who is presumably a virgin, but who is not, by semantic definition, a virgin. Well, that kind of splits the hairs, doesn't it? Kind of does a kind of a technical response, isn't it? So my response: this is a scholarly, academic, semantic, technical definition, in contrast to a non-technical, common, ordinary, conventional understanding of the word. The average man on the street would understand the girl to be a virgin. Those who heard Isaiah would understand the girl to be a virgin. So my plea is, let's not overthink the term and split hairs. Try to knock it down to the very details. Now, another reason why Isaiah 7:14 is important, in the sense that it's speaking of a virgin, is that it explains Genesis 3:15. Now, what does Genesis 3:15 say? And I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your seed and her seed. He shall bruise you on the head, and you shall bruise him on the heel. So the question here is, who is the woman? The woman is not identified, and it's not Eve, because Cain and Abel didn't do the things that are just spoken of in Genesis 3:15. So who is the woman? Well, to determine that, we're going to have to go into grammar a little bit and go to the Hebrew Bible Insert, a student's guide to the syntax of biblical Hebrew. And there, looking for Hebrew grammar, we go to the definite article. The definite article is the word the. And at 1.4.3c, we read, a noun may be articular with the word the, because it refers to a person or event known to the original audience, although unknown to us and unexplained in the context. All right, the example I give is Shanatayim Lifnei Hara'ash, 2 years before the earthquake in Amos 1:1. Well, the readers of Amos 1:1 knew exactly what Amos was talking about. But those of us who are more than 2,000 years down the road from Amos 1:1 don't know much about the earthquake. Who was injured? How big was it? Who? What? Why? All the typical questions. We can't answer most of the questions. We just know that some earthquake occurred. But the people to whom Amos was speaking to understood what he referred to when he said the earthquake. Okay, that's the point here. So Isaiah 7:14 does not state a virgin will conceive, it's the virgin will conceive. And just a note here, your translation may render the phrase in an indefinite manner, a virgin. That's the NASB, unfortunately, and other translations. But the Hebrew uses the definite article. It's a bad translation by the NASB, which, by the way, is the Bible that I use most of the time, so it's disappointing. All right, it's the definite article, the virgin. Now, in order to determine the object of the statement, we have to consult 2 Hebrew grammatical laws. Who is the phrase the virgin referring to? Okay, we start with the law of immediate context. Does the person or event apply to someone or something mentioned in the immediate context? The answer is no. Isaiah 7:14. No woman is mentioned in the immediate context. All right, we still don't know who the woman is. So now let's go to the law of previous mention. Does the person or event apply to someone or something the original audience knows about? Okay, that's our rule we looked at with Hosea 1:1. Is there a woman in a previous context that is so prominent everyone knows who the prophet is referring to when he says the woman? And our answer there is yes, the woman would be the woman of Genesis 3:15. And I will put enmity between you and the woman. Who is the woman? Yeah? And between your seed and her seed, he shall bruise you in the head, you shall bruise him on the heel. So the woman will be the Virgin Mary, Miriam. That's who the woman is being identified there. She is the woman who bore the Messianic person. All right, let's look at the options we have in referring to, if Isaiah 7:14 is referring to an unmarried girl. Okay, it's unmarried girl, what are our options? Well, one is that she's experiencing a virgin conception. She's unmarried, but she's pregnant. This fits the context, which requires the miraculous. Okay, we accept that she's a virgin and is pregnant. What's the other option we have? Well, the child is illegitimate. She's unmarried, and she's pregnant, and she's just claiming to be a virgin. And in reality, the child is illegitimate. But this is no big miracle. It happens every day. So is God encouraging an illegitimate child here and referring to this important person? I don't think so, because that's our only 2 options. Now, let's go ahead and consider this name Emmanuel. Behold, the virgin will be with child and bear a son, and she will call his name Emmanuel. Now, the name often represents the character of the person. In the Bible, that's often the case. Now, options in the light of the name Emmanuel. How does this name represent the character of the person? Well, first of all, when the parents name a child, it shows the thinking of the parents. Maybe the name will be accurate, and maybe it will not be accurate. Okay? But when God names the child, the name represents the actual character of the one who is named. And our name here is Emmanuel. With us is God. So this name actually predicts the incarnation, when God put on flesh and lived with us. Now, in Jewish culture also, an individual can have a formal name and a descriptive name. An example, 2 Samuel 12:24 through 25. Then David comforted his wife Bathsheba, and went in to her, and lay with her, and she gave birth to a son, and he named him Solomon. Now the Lord loved him, and sent word through Nathan the prophet, and he named him Jedediah, beloved of the Lord, for the Lord's sake. So here we have a formal name, Solomon, and we have a descriptive name, Jedediah. He never went by Jedediah. In Isaiah 7:14, the Messiah's descriptive name is Emmanuel. That's in the prophecy. But the formal name of the Messiah is Yeshua, and that we find in the fulfillment of the prophecy. So yes, he never went by the name Emmanuel because that was his descriptive name, God with us. All right, so there's Isaiah's time frames, verses 1 through 13. And they happened in the present time, Isaiah's present time. And then in verse 14, we jump ahead 700 years to the first coming. And here is Isaiah 7:14, expanded translation. Therefore, the Lord himself will give you all, house of David, 700 years in the future, a sign. Behold, the virgin, that'll be Miriam, will be with child and bear a son, and she will call his name Emmanuel. That's his descriptive name. With us is God. All right, so that's Isaiah 7:14. Now, let's look at rabbinic support. Is this prophecy messianic in nature? Well, amazingly enough, there is no rabbinic support. The Jewish Encyclopedia explains. The Jewish Encyclopedia says, in the Talmud and Midrash, the name does not occur at all, nor is it among the many names for the Messiah enumerated by Hamburger. This is Emmanuel. The name is thus not used in relation to the Messiah. In the Haggadah, Emmanuel is not mentioned, which seems to indicate that the application of this word to the Messiah was not known in Jewish circles. Well, that's not quite true. There is some very, very vague and cryptic evidence. Fruchtenbaum, in his book Yeshua, Volume 1, cites Risto Santala. He's citing Risto Santala's work, The Messiah in the Old Testament, in light of rabbinical writings. So Fruchtenbaum states, Santala provides some rabbinic background, stating that the oldest uncensored Jewish source texts make cryptic references to his miraculous birth. One of them is found in the Zohar, the most famous written work in the mystical tradition of the Kabbalah. There it says that the Messiah will be born from a closed womb. Well, a closed womb often speaks of infertility. Perhaps it speaks of virginity here in the Zohar. Furthermore, Avraham Eben Shushan, the compiler of a 5-volume modern Hebrew dictionary and an analytical concordance of the Old Testament, showing every word in every one of the forms in which it appears, explains that the Hebrew word Alma, which Isaiah uses to describe the girl who will give birth to the Messianic figure, means primarily a young woman before marriage. In other words, of Alma. So Eben Shoshan agrees with me. Alma speaks of a young woman before marriage. In other words, a virgin. This is also why the authors of the Septuagint, which predated Yeshua by 200 years, translated the word in the Greek term parthenos, virgin. Santala concludes that the language and thought of Matthew and Luke are completely Hebraic and boldly proclaim that Yeshua was born of the Holy Spirit and of a virgin. So there is a certain amount of vague, cryptic, rabbinic support available, but it's not very strong at all. Well, what about our fulfillment in Yeshua? Well, that is easily seen in that it is a literal prophecy with a literal fulfillment, Matthew 1:18, 22, and 23. Now, the birth of Yeshua HaMashiach was as follows. When his mother, Miriam, had been betrothed to Yosef, before they came together, she was found to be with child by the Holy Spirit. There you go. There's your qualifying factor. This is a miraculous conception. Verse 22. Now all this took place to fulfill what was spoken by the Lord through the prophet. Behold, the virgin shall be with child, and shall bear a son, and they should call his name Emmanuel, which translated means God with us. So Matthew is very clear. This is a literal prophecy with a literal fulfillment. And please note that Matthew only quotes verse 14. He does not go on and quote any verses after 14. He sticks with verse 14. Well, at this point, I'd like to review the 4 interpretive techniques used to interpret the Bible. The 4 interpretive techniques. If you'd like more information on this, I would suggest you pick up how the New Testament quotes the Old Testament, Messianic Bible Study number 134 from REL Ministries. You'll get a more detailed look at this material. So we'll look at the 4 interpretive techniques. We'll look at the rabbinic term, the usage, and the example. And Matthew 2 will provide all 4 examples. All 4 are in Matthew 2, and that tells us that all 4 interpretive techniques are valid. So let's go ahead and look at number 1. Number 1 is the Peshat. That's the plain sense or the literal meaning of the text. And the usage, when we come across a Peshat, we'll call it a literal prophecy plus a literal fulfillment. And our example is Matthew 2, 5, and 6, and there the word prophet is in the singular. They said to him, in Bethlehem of Judea, for this is what has been written by the prophet, singular, and you, Bethlehem, land of Judah, are by no means least among the leaders of Judah, for out of you shall come forth a ruler who will shepherd my people Yisrael. All right, so we have here a literal prophecy with a literal fulfillment. The Messiah would be born in Bethlehem as the prophecy, and by gum, he was born in Bethlehem. A 1-to-1 correspondence. And the Peshat, the plain meaning of the text, the literal meaning, is the most important technique in the rabbinic mind as well. We read in the Talmud, a text cannot be taken from the meaning of its Peshat. A text cannot be taken from that meaning. And then Rabbi Aharon Feldman, in his book, The Juggler and the King, writes, the simple meaning of the text is always true, the Peshat. And this is another way to state our golden rule of interpretation. When the plain sense of Scripture makes common sense, seek no other sense unless, etc., etc. So the Peshat is very, very important. Our next interpretive technique is the remez. This is the allegorical or philosophical approach. And when we come across a remez, we will call it a literal prophecy plus a typical fulfillment. The example is Matthew 2:15, and the word prophet is in the singular again. He remained there until the death of Herod. This was to fulfill what had been spoken by the Lord through the prophet, out of Egypt I called my son, Matthew 2:15. So here we have a typical fulfillment. Now what is a type? A type is a figure, a representation, or symbol of something to come, as an event in the Old Testament foreshadows another in the New Testament. So this is a typical fulfillment. Israel coming out of Egypt is a type of the Messiah coming out of Egypt. So it's a typical fulfillment. The third technique is the drash. This is the agadic or homiletical or practical application. When we come across a drash, we will call it a literal prophecy plus application. And the example is Matthew 2:17 and 18. And again, the word prophet is in the singular. Matthew 2:17. Then what had been spoken through Jeremiah the prophet was fulfilled. Verse 18. A voice was heard in the Ramah, weeping and great mourning, Rachel weeping for her children, and she refused to be comforted because they were no more. Jeremiah 31:15. So when this is a drash, this is a literal prophecy plus an application. In this prophecy, one point of similarity exists between the two statements. Jewish mothers crying for sons they would not see again. So Matthew notes that the two situations are similar, and so he applies what was happening in Jeremiah's day to what's happening in his day. Literal prophecy plus application. And the fourth technique is the sod, which is the mystical approach. And when we come across a sod, we will call it a summation. And our example is Matthew 2:23, but note here that the word prophets is plural. And came and lived in a city called Nazareth, and this was to fulfill what was spoken through the prophets, he shall be called a Nazarene. Well, where do you find that statement, he shall be called a Nazarene, in the prophets? You should find it at least twice, because it's in the plural, but you don't see it there once. That statement does not occur in the prophets. What is Matthew doing? Well, Matthew is summarizing what the prophets taught about the Messiah. Nazareth was a despised and rejected, insignificant town, and the prophets taught the Messiah would be a despised and rejected individual. Matthew is summarizing all that the prophets taught about the Messiah. He would be despised and rejected. So that's our four interpretive techniques. Now, how do you determine the correct category into which a question falls? Well, there's just two steps in each case. Number one, look at the context of the original statement. That's the most important step. Then, if there's a point-for-point literal parallel, it's a literal prophecy plus a literal fulfillment. If you look at the context, and if it's using an historical event as a type, it's a literal prophecy with a typical fulfillment. And if there's one point of similarity, it's a literal prophecy plus application. And finally, if there's no quote at all in the Old Testament to refer to, it is a summation. He's summing up all that is the prophets teach about that topic. All right, so Isaiah 7:14 is a literal prophecy plus a literal fulfillment. The Messiah would be born a virgin, a unique and miraculous conception, and Yeshua was born of a virgin, a unique and miraculous conception. All right, from the four techniques, the rabbis created an interpretive acronym from the Peshat, the Ramez, the Drash, and the Sod. They took the P sound from Peshat, the R sound from Ramez, the D sound from Drash, and the S sound from Sod, and they created a word from those sounds. And the word is parades. Parades. What does parades mean? Well, it's a reference to biblical exegesis. So if you want to look up rabbinic biblical exegesis, look up the word parades. Interesting enough, it also means paradise. It's also the word paradise. Now, let's also look at the four types of Messianic prophecy, and this is also found in Messianic Bible Study 134. Now, the four types of Messianic prophecy, we'll look at the type, the explanation, and the example. The first type is the first coming prophecy. The first coming prophecy deals strictly with the first coming. And the example is Isaiah 7:14 that we're studying. Now, the birth of Yeshua HaMashiach was as follows. When his mother, Mary, had been betrothed to Yosef, before they came together, she was found to be with child by the Holy Spirit. And then Matthew says, now all this took place to fulfill what was spoken by the Lord through the prophet. Behold, the virgin shall be with child and shall bear a son, and he shall call his name Emmanuel, which translated means God with us. So we have a first coming prophecy. It deals strictly with Yeshua's first coming. The next type of prophecy is the second coming prophecy. The second coming prophecies deal strictly with the second coming. An example is Isaiah 2, verses 1 through 4. The word which Isaiah, the son of Amoz, saw concerning Judah and Jerusalem. Now it will come about that in the last days, the mountain of the house of the Lord will be established as chief of the mountains. Well, that hasn't happened yet. That awaits the future. And will be raised above the hills, and all the nations will stream to it. And many people will come and say, come, let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the house of the God of Jacob. And that hasn't happened yet. That he may teach us concerning his ways, and that we may walk in his paths. For the law will go forth from Zion, and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. That hasn't happened yet. And he will judge between the nations, and will render decisions for many people, and they will hammer their swords into plowshares, and their spears into pruning hooks. And nation will not lift up sword against nation, and never again will they learn war. So we have a second coming prophecy. It deals strictly with the second coming. The third type of prophecy is a blend prophecy. Now, a blend prophecy combines the two comings of Messiah into one picture, and often there's no hint of the time gap in between the two comings. And in many examples of this, but a couple from Isaiah, Isaiah 9, 6, and 7, Isaiah 11, 1 through 12. So let's look at Isaiah 9, 6, and 7. For a child will be born to us. Okay. This is the first coming. Yeshua was born. Literally, physically, in the little town of Bethlehem, right? For a child will be born to us, a son will be given to us, and the government will rest on his shoulders, and his name will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Eternal Father, Prince of Peace. There's a whole bunch of descriptive names there for the Messiah. And then we jump to the second coming in verse 7. There will be no end of the increase of his government and of peace. So we know Yeshua was born in verse 6, but now his government is increasing on the throne of David and over his kingdom to establish it and uphold it with justice and righteousness from then on and forevermore. The zeal of the Lord of hosts will accomplish this. Well, that's all second coming stuff. Yeshua reigning on the throne of David. So we have here a blend prophecy. The two comings of the Messiah blended into one picture, born in Bethlehem, reigning in Jerusalem, verse 6 and verse 7. And then the final type is the complete career prophecy. This prophecy includes the first coming, the interval, the second coming, and the Messianic kingdom. And Psalm 110 is an example. The first coming and ascension are in verse 1. The Lord said to my Lord, sit at my right hand. So Yeshua is just completing his earthly ministry, and God is inviting him to ascend to the right side of his throne. Then the interval is included. Psalm 110, verse 1, the Lord says to my Lord, sit at my right hand until. That word until is a place setter, a time holder for, and that has been a place setter now for over 2,000 years. Until. That covers the period of time we're living in right now. Then we come to the second coming. The Lord said to my Lord, sit at my right hand until I make your enemies a footstool for your feet. That's the second coming, when Yeshua comes to judge the world. Then the Messianic kingdom is instituted in verses 2 through 4. The Lord will stretch forth your strong scepter from Zion, saying, rule in the midst of your enemies. That's the Messiah's ministry of kingship there in the kingdom. Your people will volunteer freely in the day of your power. In holy array from the womb of the dawn, your youth are to you as the dew. And there's the response of the Jewish people to Yeshua. We will embrace him and follow him with utmost loyalty. And then in verse 4, the Lord has sworn and will not change his mind. You are a priest forever, according to the order of Melchizedek, which speaks of his priestly ministry during the Messianic kingdom. He's going to be a king and a priest. And then the second coming, we jump back to the second coming again in verse 5 through 7. And the Lord is at your right hand. He will shatter kings in the day of his wrath. The day of his wrath is the tribulation. Verse 6, he will judge among the nations. He will fill them with corpses. He will shatter the chief men over a broad country. That's the campaign of Armageddon. And verse 7, he will drink from the brook by the wayside. Therefore, he will lift up his head. That's his victory. That's his victory. So there's a complete career prophecy. Now, we want to talk about the question of single fulfillment or double fulfillment. First of all, what is single fulfillment versus double fulfillment? Well, single fulfillment means that a prophecy speaks of one event only. Double fulfillment means that a prophecy may have a near fulfillment and a far fulfillment. So it's speaking about two events. So is Isaiah 7:14 a single fulfillment or a double fulfillment of prophecy? If it's a double fulfillment, two women would be involved. One woman in Isaiah's day experiencing a normal human conception. She would be a non-virgin. One woman in the first century when Yeshua was born, would be experiencing a miraculous conception, a virgin. So that's the way the people of double fulfillment look at Isaiah 7:14. If Isaiah 7:14 is single fulfillment, one woman would be involved, one woman in the future experiencing a miraculous conception. Well, Isaiah 7:14 is a single fulfillment prophecy. And why? Why? Well, single fulfillment accounts for the presence of Sha'ar Yeshuv. Sha'ar Yeshuv is present as a sign to Achaz. The explanation of Sha'ar Yeshuv will come as we move into verse 15 and following, which we'll do in just a minute. Single fulfillment is consistent with Matthew 1:23, which does not quote beyond verse 14. He doesn't look at verse 15. Single fulfillment is consistent with a context that demands a miraculous sign, a pregnant virgin. And single fulfillment is consistent with the meaning of Alma, which is virgin. Double fulfillment makes Alma mean young woman in Isaiah's day, a non-virgin, and virgin in Yeshua's day, which is totally inconsistent in the context. All right, with that behind us, let's take a look at point E, Jewish objections or positions regarding Isaiah 7:14. So who is the child according to the rabbis? It's not the Messiah according to them. Well, then who is it? Well, the rabbis present us with 5 options. The first one is the son of Achaz. It's Hezekiah, they say. Our refutation, Hezekiah was already born at this time. According to the text, the conception of the child is future, not in the past. Kimki, Eben Ezra, say that Hezekiah was 9 years old at this time. So he's already born. This is not a future thing. So Hezekiah's birth, in addition, was not a sign or miraculous. And Hezekiah's mother was not a virgin. Achaz was her husband. And the Sanshino states that Rashi, Eben Ezra, Kimki are aware of this argument and reject this position. The number 4, Sanhedrin 99a, refutes this position that the Messiah is Hezekiah. Well, let's look at Sanhedrin 99a. Rabbi Hillel said, "There shall be no Messiah for Israel because they've already enjoyed him in the days of Hezekiah." So Hillel's position, Messiah has already come. There's no need to look for the coming of a Messiah. Rav Joseph said, "May God forgive him for saying so." Now, when did Hezekiah flourish? During the first temple. That's 727 to 699 BC. Yet Zechariah, prophesying the day of the second temple, 520 BC, 120 years later, proclaimed, "Rejoice greatly, O daughter of Zion. Shout, O daughter of Jerusalem. Behold, thy king cometh unto thee. He is just and having a salvation, lowly, and riding upon an ass, and upon a colt, the foal of an ass." Quoting Zechariah 9:9. So, Rav Joseph's point, Messiah was still future. Hillel was wrong. Now, just a note on Rabbi Hillel from the Jewish Encyclopedia. There we read, at the age of 40, Hillel went to Palestine. 40 years he spent in study. And the last third of his life, he passed as the spiritual head of Israel. He's the top rabbi, the senior rabbi. His activity of 40 years is perhaps historical. And since it began, according to a trustworthy tradition in Shabbat 15a, 100 years before the destruction of the Jerusalem, it must have covered the period 30 BC to 10 CE, because Hillel died in 10 CE. Now let's synchronize this information with Yeshua's life. Yeshua visited the temple at 12 years of age. That visit would have occurred in approximately 6 CE or 6 AD, 4 years before Hillel's death. As the spiritual head of Israel, he was undoubtedly among the rabbis who debated Yeshua in Luke 2, 46 and 47. He talked with the young Messianic person. He looked Yeshua square in the eye and did not recognize who stood before him. In other words, Hillel rejected the coming of the Messiah. His position was that the Messiah had already arrived in the person of King Hezekiah. There's no need to hope for the coming of the Messiah, said Hillel. So, Sanhedrin 99a refutes this position that Hezekiah is the Messiah. All right, number 2. The Messiah is the son of Isaiah, Isaiah's second son, and a refutation. Number 1, Isaiah's wife was not an Alma. His firstborn son is standing by his side. 2, Isaiah never had a son named or entitled Emmanuel. There's no solid evidence that indicates this. 3, you have to speculate that Isaiah married a second time, and no hard evidence for a second marriage exists. And you have to water down Alma to mean young woman. So I'm convinced that Alma unquestionably means virgin. If you can change my mind about the meaning of Alma, I'd be open to this position. But to water down Alma dilutes the miraculous nature of the sign. Now Rashi and Ibn Ezra take the position that Maharshal al-Hashbaz is Emmanuel, Isaiah's second son. So does the NIV Study Bible. If you're interested in this position, see the NIV Study Bible notes. All right, the third position the rabbis supply. This is just another son of Achaz. This is Kimki's position. And the refutation, the position does not fit the miraculous nature of the sign. Number 4. It's just the son of the royal family. And the Sanchino says that this is Rabbi Abarbanel's position. And a refutation, the position does not fit the miraculous nature of the sign. Number 5. Emmanuel is not a proper name nor a future sign. And this is the position of Encyclopedia Judaica. There we read Emmanuel, with us is God. The name to be given to a still unborn baby boy, they recognize its future, according to Isaiah 7:14, apparently as a symbol. At least they recognize the future here. But in fact, the words Emmanuel are here, as they are universally admitted to be in chapter 8, verse 10, not a proper name, but a simple statement to the effect that with us is God. So this thing is not messianic at all. The medieval Jewish commentator David Kimke comments that the sign was to strengthen Achaz's conviction in the truth of the prophet's message. This would imply that the sign be contemporary with Achaz and not a symbol for a future occurrence. The birth of Emmanuel, therefore, could not take place as Christianity has it, see there's the bias, in the distant future after the period of Isaiah. Well, my refutation, the position is at variance with the Hebrew grammar and the miraculous sign nature of the prophecy. The fact that the rabbis offer 5 differing opinions shows that they are unable to authoritatively identify Emmanuel. They are simply son shopping, looking for a son to fit the bill. And here are the 5 positions once again: the son of Achaz, Hezekiah; the son of Isaiah, Isaiah's second son; thirdly, another son of Achaz, Kimki's position; fourthly, a son of the royal family, that's Abarbanel; and 5, Emmanuel is not a proper name nor a future sign, but a contemporary statement meant as an encouragement to Achaz. So the rabbis are confused in contrast with the New Testament, the New Covenant, which authoritatively identifies Yeshua as Emmanuel. Matthew 1, 22 and 23, quoting Isaiah 7:14 only. Now all this took place to fulfill what was spoken by the Lord through the prophet. Behold, the virgin shall be with child and shall bear a son. They shall call his name Emmanuel, which translated means God with us. All right, at this point, I've chosen to add another section to this study called E2, which is Christian position or objections. Christian position or objections. A number of commentators feel that the position I hold is inadequate. Dr. Constable summarizes the objection. This is from Dr. Tom Constable's expository notes on the Bible. Dr. Constable writes, some conservative scholars have believed that there was no initial fulfillment of this prophecy in Isaiah's day, that no child born then served as a sign. Conservatives in this group believe that the only fulfillment was the virgin birth of the Lord Jesus the Messiah. The problem with this view is the lack of a sign in Isaiah's day, and he's speaking there for Ahaz, lack of a sign for Ahaz. And my response, the understanding that there is a lack of a sign in Isaiah's day is not accurate, because verses 15 through 17 do provide Ahaz with the needed sign. Verse 9, remember verse 9 was plural pronouns of the house of David. If you all will not believe, you all will surely not last. Then he switches to the singular. He spoke to Ahaz, asked for a sign. Ahaz in the singular says, no, I don't want a sign. Then we move back to plural pronouns again. Now the sign is for the house of David. The Lord will give you all, house of David, a sign. And the sign is, behold, the virgin will be with a child and bear a son, and she will call his name Emmanuel. So that's this first coming. But right now, as we move into verse 15, we jump back to the prophet's present time. And this sign will be a sign for Ahaz. Ahaz needs a definite sign that verses 7, 8, and 9 will come to pass. Now, the singular pronouns are used here in Isaiah 7:15. He will eat curds and honey at the time he knows enough to refuse evil and choose the good. The question we need to ask is, who does the singular pronoun he refer to? And it refers to Sha'ar Yashuv. Sha'ar Yashuv will eat curds and honey at the time Sha'ar Yashuv knows enough to refuse evil and choose the good. Remember, why do we choose Sha'ar Yashuv there? Because Sha'ar Yashuv was commanded to be there in chapter 7, verse 3. Sha'ar Yashuv is present in the physical context, though not in the literary context. He's not the closest antecedent, but he is there in the context. Isaiah now shifts to the singular. Sha'ar Yashuv was commanded to be there. And that's why we chose Sha'ar Yashuv. Now, in verse 16, for before the boy, Sha'ar Yashuv, will know enough to refuse evil and choose good, the land whose two kings you, Ahaz, dread, will be forsaken. And the term the boy is the word ha-na'ar, which refers to a child, not to a baby. If Isaiah was referring to a newborn baby, he would have used the word yeled for a newborn baby. So the context is, ha-na'ar fits the context. Now, the point is that before Sha'ar Yashuv is old enough to make moral choices, the two kings will be gone. And this then is the sign for Ahaz as an individual. But then we come to verse 17, and we come to judgment on Ahaz, which is the king of Assyria. And let's read verse 17. The Lord will bring on you and your people and on your father's house such days which have never come since the day that Ephraim separated from Judah, the king of Assyria. The one who he sought for help will destroy him. Assyria will eventually invade Judah, and such an invasion that has not happened before. It's worse than any other previous invasion. Now here is the map of the campaigns of Tiglath-Pileser III. The first campaign in 734 BC, he came down the coast, destroying Philistia and the Philistines. The next campaign in 733, he came down and he destroyed Israel, the northern kingdom. The next year, he came down, that's in 732, and he destroyed Damascus and Aram. Now, Rezin was killed when Tiglath-Pileser III takes Damascus in 732 BC, 2 Kings 16:9, and Pekah was assassinated by Hoshea in 732 BC, that's 2 Kings 15:29 and 30. So let's look at the fulfillment. 2 Chronicles 28, 16 through 21. At that time, King Ahaz sent to the kings of Assyria for help. For again, the Edomites had come and attacked Judah and carried away captives. The Philistines also had invaded the cities of the lowland and of the Negev of Judah, and had taken Bethshemesh and Ailon and Gederoth and Soko and its villages, Timnah with its villages, and Gimzo with its villages, and they settled there. For the Lord humbled Judah because of Ahaz, king of Israel, for he had brought back a lack of restraint to Judah and was very unfaithful to the Lord. So that's the invasion of Judah. So Tiglath-Pileser, king of Assyria, came against him and afflicted him instead of strengthening him. Although Ahaz took a portion out of the house of the Lord and out of the palace of the king and of the princes and gave it to the king of Assyria, it did not help him. Assyria invaded Judah. Now, 2 Kings 15:29 and 30. In the days of Pekah, king of Israel, Tiglath-Pileser, king of Assyria, came and captured Ailon and Abel-Bet-Maacah and Yanoah and Kadesh and Hatzor and Gilead and Galilee, all the land of Naphtali, and carried them captive to Assyria. And verse 30, and Hoshea the son of Elah made a conspiracy against Pekah the son of Remaliah, and struck him and put him to death, and became king in his place in the 12th year of Jotham son of Uzziah. There's the fulfillment of Pekah's death. And then the fulfillment in 2 Kings 16:8 and 9. Ahaz took the silver and gold that was found in the house of the Lord and in the treasuries of the king's house and sent a present to the king of Assyria. So the king of Assyria listened to him, and the king of Assyria went up against Damascus and captured it and carried the people of it away into exile to Kir, and he put Rezin to death. So there's the fulfillment of that second sign, the sign to Ahaz. Now let's move on from verse 17, and we'll move into the near future, into verse 18, with the invasion of Assyria. This is a description of the invasion that's going to punish Ahaz after after Pekah and Rezin are killed. All right, well, let's start with verses 18 and 19, which describes the swarming of the land by the Assyrian and the Egyptians. In that day, the Lord will whistle for the fly that is in the remotest part of the rivers of Egypt, and for the bee that is in the land of Assyria. They will all come and settle on the steep ravines, on the ledges of the cliffs, and on all the thorn bushes, and in all the watering places. So Judah is going to be their battleground, and the Assyrians will defeat Egypt, and then they're going to shave Judah in verse 20. In that day, the Lord will shave with a razor hired from the regions beyond the Euphrates, that is, with the king of Assyria, the head and the hair and the legs, and it will also remove the beard. So what Ahaz hired to shave Israel and Syria will end up shaving Judah and shamed those who experienced it. And he's going to be shaved from top to bottom, from the head all the way down his legs. And the shaving of the beard was the most shameful of all. And we look in Encyclopedia Judaica under beard and shaving, and we read, in the Bible, shaving of the head and beard is considered a sign of mourning and degradation. Shaving was identified with the spontaneous plucking of the beard, an expression of great sorrow. And to humiliate a man, it was the practice to forcibly shave half of the beard, as in 2 Samuel 10:4, where the elders, because of this humiliation, were commanded to hide in Jericho until their beards grew again. So Judah will be in mourning, degraded, and humiliated by Assyria. As we move into verses 21 through 25, we see the devastation of the land. First of all, the devastation of the livestock in verses 21 and 22. Now in that day, a man may keep alive a heifer and a pair of sheep, and because of the abundance of the milk produced, he will eat curds, for everyone that is left within the land may eat curds and honey. This is the food of poverty. The cows are being kept alive to produce the milk, so they can get curds to eat rather than being slaughtered per beef because of the scarcity of the cows. Then the devastation of the crops is reviewed in verse 23. It will come about that in that day that every place where there used to be 1,000 vines valued at 1,000 shekels of silver will become briars and thorns. So the vineyards are now useless. Verse 24. People will come there with bows and arrows because all the land will be briars and thorns. So the land will be only useful for hunting wild animals that are living in the land now. And then verse 25, as for the hills which used to be cultivated with the hoe, you will not go there for fear of the briars and thorns, but they will become a place for pasturing oxen and for sheep to trample. So the hills are only useful for grazing, not planting. And this brings us to a sequel to Isaiah 7:3. In Isaiah 7:3, we learn that the Lord said to Isaiah, go out now and meet Achaz, you and your son Shar Yashuv, at the end of the conduit of the upper pool at the highway to the fuller's field. And then the sequel occurs in Isaiah 36:1 and 2. Now in the 14th year of King Hezekiah, Sennacherib, king of Assyria, came up against the fortified cities of Judah and seized them. And he stood by the conduit of the upper pool on the highway of the fuller's field. And again, here's our map, city of David, and the pool where Isaiah met Achaz and where Hezekiah meets the Assyrians. And this specific spot is mentioned because of these two confrontations. It's the same spot where Achaz's son Hezekiah has to make the same decision of faith. Do I believe God or exercise faith, or don't I? His father did not exercise faith. Hezekiah did. All right, let's finish up here. I'm going to take you a few minutes over, but there are two prophecies in Isaiah 7. And this is a time frame and list of kings in their order of ascension to the throne. Now, Isaiah 7:14 is designed to sustain the Davidic dynasty for 700 years. It would let them know the Messiah is going to come, and the Davidic dynasty will survive over the turbulent and dangerous years to come, and there were 700 years to go. Now, Isaiah 7:15 through 25 is designed to sustain this member of the Davidic dynasty only. In just a few years, verses 15 through 25 will come to pass. Achaz's enemies will be slain and his throne secure. But one more point before we move on. Verses 15 through 25 authenticated Isaiah because it's a measurable, objective prophecy. This proved that Isaiah was a true prophet. He submitted to the test of a prophet and passed. And if the near prophecies come to pass, then the distant prophecies can be trusted. And so this prophecy was a number that certified Isaiah as a genuine prophet. All right, our conclusion. Yeshua is the virgin-born child. And a summary, the Messiah would be born of a virgin, a unique and miraculous conception. All right, I've taken you over time a few minutes. We're all ready now to start Isaiah 8:14 and 15, which is the stone of stumbling and rock of offense. So we will see you next session. Thanks so much for coming along and being our students. We see you then. Lahitraot. Lahitraot.